Hello and welcome to GuyLogicGaming. My name is Temco, and this was supposed to be a rant on why I hate really bad PC ports, but sadly, after recording this very rant 3 times on separate occasions, I found the conclusion that I really dislike ranting. I really dislike the negative discourse because it doesn't allow for a conversation. It doesn't allow to highlight the good stuff that we should always praise and only bashes down on the bad stuff we already dislike. So I've changed my plans. This video is all about good PC ports and why they matter, why I care about PC ports, and why I think you should as well. But most importantly, it's about how to spot and view at PC ports and PC builds and see why some are good and some are bad, and why certain ones are just not designed for PC, and why that indicates a lack of respect from developers for the PC platform in some scenarios, and in others it indicates a very thorough understanding of the PC market. So initially what prompted this is a surge of these very flawed and weak PC ports from mobile platforms, as well as some AAAs that design for console first and then sort of shove it over on PC with all the gimmicky bullshit attached. But there are so many good PC ports available, good PC games available, that have a complete understanding of what makes for a good build. I'm gonna run down those games and talk about what I feel makes for a good PC build and why that matters. So first we have to decide what we measure a PC port on. What do we measure a game build on? Well, it's fairly simple, I would say. That is technical competence and functional competence. Technical competence really boils down to things like performance, graphical scaling, visual range between hardware differences, stuff like that. And then we have functional competence, and those are things like accessibility options such as colorblind mode, UI design based around hotkeys and shortcuts and their implementation, and things like rebindable keys and so on that are fairly important in the PC market. And I'll also try to talk about the difference between console and mobile ports and see where some of the idiosyncrasies come from either one of them based on how they're being used. So let's go ahead and dive into the matter. And from a technical perspective, there's 2 main components to a port. Obviously, if it's porting from a console such as an Xbox or PS4 to PC, or it's a simultaneous release for all 3 or even with Switch 4 platforms these days, then we're gonna have, in general speaking, a developer designing a game with the idea of all 4 systems. And in some scenarios this is a very good thing. For example, BioWare generally develops games to be across all systems, fairly competent, but they do make certain allowances for console that they sort of compromise in on PC. And then you have developers like Warner Bros. That pushed out Arkham Knight, where they had the console version done and then shoved it to a third party, sort of telling him to get it done ASAP, not really caring what the end result was. And in between those two, I think, is a middle ground on how most situations arise for console ports to PC. One is simultaneous development, and the other is an afterthought tacked on. And there are good examples of afterthoughts or games being developed after initial release for PC. GTA 5 is a very solid example of a game fully designed for console, fully built with console in mind. And that's why it's taken a very long time initially for GTA 5 to come to PC. And there are some other examples of games having very delayed responses and coming to PC much later because fan outcry saying that they really wanted it. I need not point to any further than Dark Souls 1 for this very specific scenario. It wasn't a good PC port by any stretch of the imagination, but the only reason there was a PC port at all was because the fans and the players of Dark Souls said they wanted it on PC. And I think that has done the franchise a fantastic bit of good, but I'm getting ahead of myself for a bit. I feel there's 2 major camps in the way console games come to PC, either afterthought or simultaneous development. But we have a third branch here, and that is mobile development. More and more games coming to mobile also then shift to PC. This is generally games that are initially designed for Android devices due to the way Android and Java development allows for a much easier crossover onto the PC platform. And it's a fairly easy thing to do overall in terms of complexity in architecture and complexity in UI design. I'll go into that in a little bit. But the most important thing to note with regards to mobile to PC is that mobile controls generally consist out of touch interfaces, and those can be simulated with mouse movement and a click, which means that it's fairly easy to pick up a mobile game wholesale and dump it on PC. Obviously, this does not create a very good port for an endless amount of reasons I'll get into in a second. Now, combining these 2 elements, then you go into the performance bit. Performance we generally measure in terms of FPS. And while there are other metrics and measurements to write performance by, such as input lag, such as consistent frame timings, and so on. But the easiest way of measuring performance is saying, well, it hits 60 FPS consistently, let's take that as a baseline. And there is still some wiggle room here and there, obviously. We're not gonna just say this game hits 60 on the lowest settings on a 1080 Ti and say that is a good performing title. Of course not. We obviously look at other games in different genres and in different settings and from other studios and say, well, if these other games can get these hair effects and these rain effects and these occlusion effects in and still hit these marks, why can't this title? Why can't Dishonored 2 hit the same level of performance that Doom can, where it has about the same level of graphical fidelity in many scenarios? This is a very important baseline to measure technical performance for a game. But it takes it a step further. A good PC port also has graphical scaling. And from a perspective of performance, graphical scaling isn't as important, but it is very important on the PC market, as opposed to console and to a lesser extent mobile. On mobile, you generally develop for lowest common denominator. So if you're developing a new game, you don't just develop it based on the Galaxy S8 or the iPhone 7 or something similar. No, you develop it based on the Galaxy SJ5X, Y, whatever. It's the mid-range to low-range phone. You base it on these phones that are much weaker, but still very good, that are a couple of years older even maybe, because you want to reach the greatest amount of audience, lowest common denominator. And that is a mobile consistency across basically every development cycle, lowest common denominator. On console, you develop for a single level of technical prowess. With the introduction of Scorpio, the Xbox One XXX, or PS4 Pro, there is a little bit more flexibility here, but even there, you always aim for the same general performance baseline. If it runs on one machine, it is most likely going to run on every machine that way. But when it comes to PC, graphical scaling for performance, from everything from post-processing effects, to texture quality, to rain effects, to shadows, to anti-aliasing, all these things matter because when I run a game with a 1080 Ti, I can push out a lot more technical prowess, a lot more special features than somebody running a 780 or 760 even, or even a 750 Ti. Much older, much weaker card that is a couple of years out of date. But on PC, both of us want to enjoy this title to some extent. Maybe one player is going to play it on low graphic settings, maybe the other player is going to play it on maximum graphic settings. But because of the way the PC ecosystem works and a variety of different parts and the inter-exchanging of these different parts, maybe one has an Intel CPU with an AMD graphics card, the other has an AMD CPU with an NVIDIA graphics card. All these different effects matter when designing your PC port. That's why we often have issues where people said, oh, but this game is performing very badly on AMD cards, whereas this game has NVIDIA Hairworks that doesn't really work well, and this game implemented tessellation in a very bad way, and that way Radeon cards of this generation really can't deal with it. All these different things, and companies obviously abuse this to full effect, trying to get more sales on both sides of the aisle. All these things matter when you're designing a game for a PC port. And when you look at options menus and you look at settings in a game and it has a nice long range of options and performance metrics, this allows you to say, okay, well, this game uses OpenGL. It also has Vulkan support. It also has DirectX support. Let's make sure that people can use the game the way they want to. It allows them to customize their gaming experience based on the gaming hardware they have. The Witcher 3, for example, has NVIDIA Hairworks. Disabling that definitely looks worse in terms of Hairworks, but because NVIDIA Hairworks and due to NVIDIA's shitty consumer practices, it's only available on much newer cards, the fact of the matter is, many people had to disable it, and this obviously had other effects on the game experience. So the ability to change all these options and allow a variety of different things is what makes for a good PC build. Graphical scaling allows for a much wider range of people to play the game, but unlike console or mobile, you don't either target the lowest common monitor or a single set of performance metrics. You have to optimize for a wide range of systems and a much larger range of configurations that may have their own idiosyncrasies. Now, combining all of this, you sort of generate a technical competence. This is merely, does the game boot up? Does the game run? There's also other things you have to take care of, because unlike on many games on console, where even though that is changing, most of the sales are still from physical discs. On a PC, the vast majority of sales these days come from downloadable content, either using Steam or Origin or GOG or some other platform. People will download their games, and I look at a title such as Doom with a 66 gigabyte download. While for me in the Netherlands that's not an issue, for someone in Australia, that's a large chunk of their monthly data limit cap, and although I have very different opinions on data limit caps, that is a big chunk of data for them. Whereas there is no real reason to do this. Bethesda could have easily compressed 40 gigabytes of audio files down to 20 or 15 or 5. but they didn't on PC, which they did do on console due to the way the discs work and the capacity of those discs. And it's these minor things, and don't get me wrong, Doom is a fantastic PC port, but it's these minor things that basically tell you that many companies really don't view the PC market as their primary market. They view it as an afterthought, even companies that apparently spend a lot of effort getting good builds out. Outside of the technical competence of a title, you also have to look at the functional competence. Now you might say, well, it's a game. If it runs well technically, you hit 60 FPS and it doesn't crash, and it runs well on your graphics card, whether you run it on low settings or max settings, what's there to complain about? It could be a bad game. Maybe there's design flaws in the game that are abhorrent and it's just a bad game overall, but that doesn't really impact the PC build so much or the PC port so much. That impacts the entire game experience. It doesn't matter whether I'm playing on mobile or I'm sitting on my Xbox or I'm sitting behind a PC. It's a bad game. It's gonna be a bad game regardless of how well they build it functionally. And I'm gonna agree there, but also disagree there. What I mean specifically with functional competence means three things: accessibility options, UI design and implementation, and then secondary functionality such as rebindable keys. And I'll run through these as I go. The biggest and most important one to me is UI design. On mobile, generally speaking, UI has to be hidden in corners. It has to be small and has to have a lot of interfacing options that pop up and are easily accessible with one click. You can't have hover-ups, you can't have drag tooltips, you can't have multi-select. Mobile just doesn't do it that well. And if it does, there's still a lot of other issues. On-screen controls work badly, so you end up having to use very simplified controls and a very straightforward action-by-action interface that doesn't allow for any intelligence or hotkeying or any more deeper context. A good developer that takes their mobile title, extrapolates what they want from the game experience to PC, and then builds on that to expand the PC sphere due to the much more extensive capabilities of a PC interface, such as keyboard and mouse, does a good job. But many sadly do not. There's games that don't even have a quit button. And I can point to a few examples recently where I've specifically mentioned games like The Old Man's Journey that don't even have the ability to change your audio levels. They only have a toggle for on or off, because generally speaking, if you're on mobile, you have a physical button for your audio levels, and you have in-game button to toggle the audio if you don't want to close down all your phone's audio. And it's these design choices that are very logical on mobile that make absolutely no sense on PC. But the UI design takes on further than that. Having the option to change your volume is one part. I wouldn't call it technical competence. Just having the option to change your volume, having multiple sliders for background noise and vocal noise and all these extra things we've come to expect on PC. And I dare say people should expect the same on mobile as well as console if they haven't already. But from a different point, it's just a simple design choice in UI implementation takes more steps than that. A good example here would be the game Mass Effect Andromeda. It has a very clunky and very unwieldy UI on PC. And the reason for that is simple. It's the same reason Mass Effect 2 had issues and Mass Effect 1 had issues with the UI. It's because the UI has to be designed around being usable with a controller, not just a mouse and keyboard. So when on a controller, you end up having maybe 16 buttons total, maybe a couple of button press combinations, and there's no such thing as hover over, there's no such thing as drag and drop, there's no such thing as contextual menus you can open to explore deeper. You have to simplify controls down to that kind of level. It's not as bad as mobile, where you only have one level of activity, that is the press of your finger on a screen, but on console you're still fairly limited in how far you can go with the UI. And many scenarios you have to change the entire UI, focus around what is available then. A good example is the Mass Effect Andromeda upgrade menu, where you have to go through multiple tiers of views and windows and detail reports to get to the primary point, which is trying to upgrade a weapon. The reason they had to do it that way, and I'm not sure they had to do it that clunkily specifically for console versus PC, but the reason they did it on console was because the way they had to stage information, because you couldn't do multi-contextual menus there. You couldn't just open up an item, right-click and say upgrade this item. You had to go deeper into the menu further. Just picking up that UI and shoving it on PC because of a lack of time or resources, again, is lazy development in my opinion, and going by the review scores for Mass Effect Andromeda, specifically in the UI, that sort of bit them in the ass. So it's these UI interaction parts that are very important to get right on a good PC port. On a bad PC port, you might have something like Arkham Knight, Technical Nightmare. On a lazy PC port, you might have something like Mass Effect Andromeda that is missing core functionality, which we expect on PC. Now, implementing UI is very difficult. In my opinion, as someone that does UI design and UI implementation as a day job, UI design is often overlooked as something that has to be simple but very robust and flexible. Oftentimes, different users interact with the UI in very different manners, and different levels of competence, both technically and functionally, very greatly differ how someone looks at a certain feature. As someone that is very tech savvy, I can read through a bunch of text very easily and select the proper options. But one thing I really enjoy about certain games is that they explain what certain technical details mean. Sure, a developer working in a game studio as a full-time job is going to know what the difference between FXAA, SMAA, SSAO, and everything else in between all these various different forms of options are, but if you've been paying attention, you'll notice SSAO isn't a form of anti-aliasing, even though I put it in that list. If you've not been paying attention, you probably nodded along because you recognize some of those words in the drop-down menu in some game, but you're not really sure what they mean. So many developers, and this goes for console as well, but generally speaking, on console you don't have the chance to change these options. On PC, people will change these options, but aren't really sure what they do. They aren't sure really what the impact difference between FXAA and SMAA times 2 might be in terms of technical performance. Should they do that, or should they increase their shadow quality? Because, quite frankly, the vast majority of players do not have a machine with two 1080 Ti's running in SLI to be able to crank both options up to maximum. They have to make a few compromises to which they prefer more. Maybe a bit higher texture, maybe a bit more post-processing, but let's lower that AA a little bit. I'm not too worried. They have the options and abilities to do so. And when your UI interface and your UI doesn't explain those options as it should explain gameplay features in terms of tutorials, as it should allow players to do things like in-game benchmarking to get a good feel for it, all these extra things are part of a functional competence of a fully built PC port. Now again, you'll notice I'm not talking about gameplay settings or gameplay options or questing or how you progress through a story or how dialogue systems work, because if we have that conversation, then I can pick Fallout 4 and tell you how not to do it. All these various different systems rely on having a solid UI to back up any possible gameplay decisions the developers have made for the player. And in a game like Mass Effect Andromeda, that might mean that the developers have to spend some more time how to communicate things like crafting resources versus available resources versus crafting requirements. There is a definite correlation between all these resources. And instead, in this particular case, they have to go through several menus and several layers deep across multiple locations within the game world, which is annoying, irritating, and not fun. And part of that is just bad UI design, but part of that comes from the fact that they had to work with the restrictions from the console port. On a pure PC port, that sort of thing should never really be an issue in my opinion. It's an issue sometimes, but that then comes down to bad UI design and not just limitations from a different environment. So that brings me to the second part of functional competence in a PC port or PC build. That is accessibility options. I already talked about graphical options and different options for graphical scaling and a visual range for performance metrics from low fidelity to high fidelity, but accessibility options are a very separate ballgame that, generally speaking, mobile doesn't do at all. Consoles do very, very badly, and on PC, we haven't seen a whole ton of it in most scenarios. Now, there are a couple of gems here like Doom with extensive colorblind modes in all the various formats, and even some indies like Mid-Boss, a recently released rogue-like title, do allow for an extensive range of customizations based on physical characteristics of the players, be it colorblind mode, even things like changing the direction of the mouse position. Maybe somebody has a handicap in their hands and can't use the regular W, A, and D positions. This is also where rebindable keys come into play, because certain people have different keyboard layouts. Maybe they have a ZERTY, maybe they use Dvorak for some reason. And this all sort of binds together the functional competence of a PC build. Now, I could go on for many hours on good and bad combinations of accessibility, UI design, and the implementation of such, as well as rebindable keys. And there's many examples of bad ways. Dark Souls 1, with all its grandeur and greatness as a title, from a PC gamer perspective, is missing quite a few things, even with all the various mods that people have made to improve upon the shoddy port. And DS1's port is notoriously bad, so that is a edge case example to point out, but it's not an edge case example in general. Simple things like button prompts are often used for Xbox controller prompts, when there is no real reason to do so on the PC. Even allowing controls to be set like something like a Steam controller or PS4 controller allow for button prompts to be switched on the fly. Obviously, developers have to spend time and effort to implement these button prompts, but be they keyboard button prompts, be they Xbox controller button prompts or PS4 button prompts, they have to be available. And if you're only developing for one system, then you can just build those button prompts for that particular system and not really care about anything else. And if you're mobile, you sort of create a little circle that glows in a little area and tell people to smash their hand on top of it. On PC, that sort of thing doesn't really fly, especially when it comes to keyboard controls coupled with controller prompts. This clashes immensely because people don't know the difference between A, B, X, and Y on a keyboard. What would that correspond with? You'd have to go in settings. Hopefully there's rebindable keys. Hopefully there's the information listing somewhere on what these keys do. Maybe there's weird binding issues here and there. A very common thing that many developers do on console ports when bringing them to PC ports is binding the left and right bumpers to things like page up and page down or home and end, which is ridiculous. Those are not positions a PC player's hands rest on. So then you have good PC ports and good PC builds that understand these things. We use the mouse. We use contextual menus. We have right click. We have the ability to scroll. All these extra minor things which we use on a daily basis, whether it's while scrolling through a Facebook feed, tabbing through a YouTube video, or just using it for your daily workload. We understand shortcuts, hotkeys, and contextual menus intuitively on PC, and good PC games make use of that effectively, be they RTSs that have contextual menus, be they grand strategy titles that have a lot of customization options, or in some scenarios, be they even FPS titles like Doom again, or We Happy Few, a survival game, or even indie titles of very many pedigrees and levels of skill. All know and understand intuitively what makes functional competence competent is combining accessibility for people that may have a handicap or have different requirements in terms of control interfaces, UI design that works within the tools for the PC market, not just gets adapted to those tools based on a previous existing market to the bare minimum, and then implements all of that with a core, solid set of features and allows for an extensive range of interaction and interfacing between keyboard and mouse, controller inputs, and even, for example, Tobii eye tracking software. Now, combining this technical competence with this functional competence in a proper mix and balance, we have a very good PC build and a very solid PC port. It doesn't say anything yet about the contents of the game, but when these two segments are combined properly, whether they be for mobile to PC, console to PC, directly multi-tiered releases across multiple platforms, when combined properly, you know that the players going into the game will have a clean understanding of the mechanics of the control scheme and also have a much faster grasp on the controls of the title and the gameplay that the title is trying to convey. And this can be Blood Bowl, this can be Dark Souls, this can be We Happy Few, and this can be something powerful as Doom. All of this combined creates a solid stage where the game's gameplay can shine in full regard. When these things are not combined properly, we get things like annoyances with the UI in Mass Effect Andromeda, annoyances with interfacing such as No Man's Sky among its many other flaws, and even annoyances with interaction and combat and controls such as Dark Souls 1. When these are completely missing, we get annoyances in things like Old Man's Journey. When they are combined, we get games like We Happy Few and Doom that combine solid mechanical complexity in their options in a digestible way that allow for full control down to the player. Now that I've spoken at length about what makes a solid PC port and a solid PC build in my opinion, I want to take it a step beyond that and explain why they matter, why they show respect to the consumer, why they show care from a developer, and why an attention to detail in terms of options menus, in terms of functional competence to the PC build, in those technical and functional parts shines through in different areas of the game. And this goes for the entire scale of a game. Whether you're talking about Witcher 3, whether you're talking about Dark Souls or Doom or any other game, good solid design choices in terms of technical competence and functional competence result in a very solid understanding of the player base on a PC and design choices in gameplay, storytelling, and overall mechanical complexity in the gameplay itself that result in a better title. So let's explain why that is. Primarily when I talk about PC ports and why I find them important, I feel that it shows a level of knowledge and understanding and an attention to detail from a developer to a version of their title that players can get their hands on. This level of care and attention to detail shines through in every example. Specific examples when taken at a platform space view from console and from PC, but again we're focusing on PC here, do take a look at some of these issues and say, okay, Witcher 3 has movement control controls that are very intuitive for a mouse and keyboard. They have adapted these controls to use with a controller. FPS titles that release multi-platforms such as Call of Duty or Battlefield have auto-aim included on a console version, but segregate players between the two variants because, obviously, keyboard and mouse are infinitely superior for FPS titles. Other games have to slow down their pacing. A very major note here at pacing and mechanics is developers understanding the pacing on a console for shooter games, for FPS titles, for loadouts, and everything in between. The very reason why the common trope of modern military shooters only having 2 guns and you can only carry 2 guns magically and a grenade is due to the limitations of a console's control set. And this translates back to PC, where we don't really have this limitation. And again, this translates back into games like Doom, where this limitation is gone. And also other games that are multi-platform at the same time, such as Final Fantasy XIV, make concessions and restrictions based on these limitations of their platforms. So on a PC version, a lot more care is taken and done in allowing players multiple hotkey bars, allowing to use control keys, allowing them much more freedom and control over movement while interacting. Whereas on the PlayStation variant of Final Fantasy XIV, you have a much smaller scale of actions you can do directly from your controller, but those actions are focused more on the direct action you're performing at that time. UI changes, button prompts change, and interactions become focused on the active window, whereas on PC, it doesn't really matter. You can have an open window, you have a mouse and a keyboard. They are allowed to operate independently. So when you have this attention to detail and this understanding of the platform they're trying to develop for, it then shows a level of respect to the consumer who is paying hard-earned money down for the title. And modern games are not cheap, even though the regular price of a AAA release over the last decade or so hasn't changed much beyond 60 or so euros. Current day games often are evolved from things like season passes, DLC content, cosmetics, and even though this is not new, special editions in many variants. All these extra ways of creating revenue streams, whether through microtransactions, cosmetic DLC, in-game quest packs, and any variety in between, allow the developers to still cash in on more money from the player as opposed to just getting the box copy, which is more of a traditional practice, currently sort of and sadly dying and dead. And that may be a topic for a very different video. But due to the way these games are more expensive now, when you have a game that understands its market and it understands it well, like Doom or We Happy Few, then you have a very solid case for a developer being able to get more money out of players. And obviously, from a developer's perspective, they want you to pay for their hard work. And it shows a level of respect when developers cater to the market they're trying to sell by creating a solid experience based on the platform that people are playing on, and not just based on the gameplay mechanics or the experience people are trying to pull out of the game, and sort of forgive the lack of options and functionality in the title. And I'm sort of looking at you, Bethesda, for this one. There are many ways to influence players in purchasing more product, and many of these ways are tied into why a good PC port matters. When there is a game and you enjoy playing that game for the experience and you don't have annoyances and issues and minor gripes in trying to figure out how systems work, when you come back to a title after 3 months or 6 months or even a year, such as The Witcher 3, after 2 expansions and a Game of the Year edition, it should be intuitive that when you put your hands on WASD and the other hand over your mouse and you start running in the game, all the commands and controls should flood right back into you. All the buttons you're commanding at your fingertips should always be intuitive. And The Witcher does a decent job at this, in my opinion. Movement, attack combinations, timings, blocking, dodging, Gwent, all these different mechanical areas of the game are fluid and simple enough while still making a few concessions here and there down for the console. But thankfully not too many. The Witcher 3 is truly an excellent title in this regard. So then we come to the fact that the developer now can get more money out of players for a better product, meaning they can spend more time developing a better product, meaning they can show more care and a greater attention to detail on these minor things. Even minor things such as colorblind mode that have never really had much attention over the last decade have started to gain traction across many games. But sadly, not all games implement it equally well. A good example here is Overwatch, where there is major issues with the way colorblind mode was implemented. Sadly, it wasn't implemented that well and still causes major issues for people that are colorblind, as opposed to something like Doom. And I'm keep repeating Doom here as an example because it is a truly fantastic PC experience that is very well implemented. And the fact that both have a implementation, but the level of quality of that implementation is so fundamentally different, again speaks to a level of respect and a level of care from developers to consumers. And that, I think, is why good PC ports matter, because they show developers care. Here's where the ranty bit comes back in, because there are a couple of things that I really hate about PC ports. Not all PC ports by any means, but many PC builds and many PC ports are truly lazy. Some are just bad. We can look at Arkham Knight and just say that is a bad PC port that should never exist. We can look at Mortal Kombat X and say that that game should never have been brought on PC in its current state, and both of these games are no longer on PC at all. They've been pulled from the shelves, and Mortal Kombat X even pulled and said, oh, there was not enough interest. Well, I'm gonna disagree. There was lots of interest, but your product was absolute gutting shite. But there are plenty of lazy PC ports, and I've called out to An Old Man's Journey, a truly enjoyable, light-hearted, questing game where you have a story and an art style and a beautiful music score accompanying it, marred by the fact that the game lacks every basic functionality we expect of a title on PC because it was ported from mobile. The fact that the only option is a toggle for muting your audio or turning it on, and there is no functionality anywhere, including a lack of a quit button, isn't okay. And there's many games like Race for the Galaxy that came out last week that also miss basic core functionality. And this is not a new thing. Many ports are extremely lazy. The original Dark Souls 1 port was extremely lazy. The port for Dark Souls 3, while technically complete and functionally competent, was not technically competent. There were many issues, and control schemes such as the PS4 controller not working on PC, even though there is a literal PS4 version of the title, are just not acceptable. These kinds of hacky jobs at porting games to PC as an afterthought, with barely a focus group put together on a meeting before they pointed at a third party and said, good luck, you have 6 weeks, are an indication of the kind of market where PC is an afterthought, and that shouldn't be the case. And that is a very strange idea and notion to me personally, with PC being considered an afterthought with some of these companies. Now, not all by any means. Again, id Software with Doom did an amazing job. And then we have Arcane with Dishonored 2 doing an absolute crapshoot of a job in that department in terms of technical competence. And the functional competence though, they were spot on and provided quite a few options. And then you move on to the other side of the spectrum, such as Eastern developers from Japan mostly with fighting games or even with things like Dark Souls, and then you have basically no competence to create a proper PC version. Many games lock their physics into the FPS, and if you unlock that FPS or forbid anything, if you play a game with unlocked FPS, or even if it unlocks FPS to a higher setting, it suddenly results in very weird physics issues or even multi-damage taken, such as a recent remaster of Vanquish, where your higher FPS scores resulted in literally taking 5 to 10 times more damage, which suddenly makes the game a whole different kind of challenging. That's not exactly what you're looking for. All of these combinations of plain lazy development, it's not even bad development, it's not even forgiving that these are people that have no idea what they're doing. Maybe they're new, maybe it's a fresh studio. I could point to Mass Effect Andromeda and say that the studio behind it was rushed for time, was rushed for resources, did not have the veteran developers from BioWare on standby to assist them with the difficult parts of designing the game, and it's definitely not okay in terms of the consumer being shafted on an excellent title and getting a mediocre one, but at least I can understand that perspective. But from game developers that have a solid understanding of the PC market and have a solid comprehension of what the PC market is looking for, I find myself to be quite a bit less forgiving. Bethesda. So how then should we encourage developers to create better PC ports? How should we encourage them to create better PC versions, more complete PC versions? How do we tell developers and how do we show developers that we care, that our game has rebindable keys? How do we tell them that we not only care about the IP they're publishing, whether it's Fallout, whether it's Doom, or whether it's a new game such as Subnautica that combines unique elements from existing titles and existing genres? The only real way to do that is provide feedback, to create reviews, to look at options, and to tell them out loud. Why don't they have a colorblind mode? If you're releasing a game on PC, make sure you have volume controls. If a developer puts out a title in beta and says, give me feedback, do give him feedback. Not just on saying, this quest here is fun, I like it, but tell him why you find certain mechanical parts of the game, as explained earlier, in technical competence and functional competence to be important to your gaming experience. Because at the end of the day, you may play a game for a few hours, but if you have to wait a week until you get back from your job, you're tired, you're exhausted, and you sit back down, you pick up that controller, you sit down behind your keyboard, and you have to face another after a Dark Souls boss and you sort of forgot how to dodge roll or parry or which button did what and at what timing, that is very frustrating. Part of that is remembering timings. Part of that is trying to cobble together your mind how you remembered the last time which combination of archaic buttons you had to press to do this specific action. So in conclusion, I find PC ports to be very important, and I find PC builds to be very interesting, as they indicate the kind of developer we're facing and the kind of game we can expect in level of detail, in level of competence, and the amount of care and respect shown to the platform and the consumer buying it. There are many games with very solid PC builds. I have mentioned a few here in this video, and in the background you've been seeing gameplay from those very games. Some are even not fully developed yet, such as Subnautica or We Happy Few. All of these games are focused around creating a full title, including the technical and functional competence of their PC build. And some other games just created the full title and then shoved it on PC. And some of these games with bad ports we truly love. Dark Souls is an excellent example of a game we love to bits, but we don't love it due to its PC port. We love it despite it, and that is a damn shame. I truly hope developers, as From Software has done over the lifespan of Dark Souls, take note, take care, and create better, more complete PC editions for their games. So we can all sit back and enjoy with a mouse, keyboard, controller, or even Tobii eye tracking, and above all, with a damn quit button. So thank you for watching. If you found this video useful, press that like button and leave a comment. Tell me what you thought about it and tell me your views on this topic. And if you want to see more content like this on the channel, just press that subscribe button down below and we will deliver. And above all, if you want to support us to continue creating these long form videos, then check us out on Patreon. There's a link in the description down below for exactly that purpose. So I wish you a good day, and until next time, right here on GuyLogicGaming.